Discover the surprising truth. 5 incredible secrets to transform your life and empty your mind. The rain drummed a relentless tattoo against Sarah's bedroom window as she sorted through the clutter of years long forgotten, her heart a hollow drum. Dust motes floated in the thin slices of light cutting through the gloom of the attic. She reached for the old wooden chest, the rusted latch groaning as it gave way. Inside, her grandmother's journals beckoned her. Yellowed pages filled with elegant cursive. Secrets. Perhaps answers to questions she didn't know how to voice. Fingers trembling, she opened the first journal. To uncover your strength, you must first recognize your own value. The words wrapped around her like a warm embrace and produced a flicker of something long buried hope. Could these insights help her reshape the burdens of everyday life, ease the weight of financial strain pressing down like lead on her chest, and unlock a world beyond the monotonous grind of 2 jobs and a daughter who barely noticed her? Then came the familiar rush of anxiety. The knowing claws of responsibilities rushed back. Mia needed her attention. Her father grew frilier with every visit. Bills piled up like accusations, reminding her that ambition wasn't meant for people like her. What would the town think? What would they say? The pressure was suffocating, mingling with a deep-seated fear that any attempt to rise above her station would lead her backwards instead. Before she could lose her nerve, she continued reading. You must challenge the norms that cripple you. A visceral panic surged through her. Her colleagues, already accustomed to her quiet compliance, would surely see this newfound confidence as a threat. Did she dare to risk their ridicule in pursuit of a life that felt just out of reach? Struggling with the urge to disrupt the balance, Sarah felt herself teetering on the edge. If she stepped beyond where others wanted her to stay, who would be there to catch her? The thought of rising or falling alone paralyzed her with uncertainty. That internal struggle was exhausting. Could ambition and loyalty coexist within her? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The distraction barely held her attention as she reread those passages, each word echoing in her mind. Suddenly, an unexpected setback crashed into her life. Her boss, a man she had trusted, took credit for her latest project, dismissing her contributions as simple coincidence. A deep anger flared within her, and she felt a nerve twang. Would she let herself be silenced again? Could her voice rise above the din of their expectations? With every passing moment, tension spiraled. Would standing up for herself mean abandoning family loyalty and repeating the cycle for Mia? Could she afford the risk when her heart teetered between rage and resignation? As Sarah prepared for her upcoming performance review, she knew she would have to decide fight or fall silent. At the edge of that tumultuous precipice, she wrestled with doubt, a whirlwind in her mind. Standing before her boss and the executive team, her body trembled even as determination surged through her veins. The room held its breath, but the clouds of uncertainty swirled viciously around her heart. She gripped the table tightly, feeling the polished surface beneath her fingertips. This moment could change everything. Would she dare to raise her voice against the unfairness that had marred her life, or would she crumble into the familiar shadows? And just as Sarah's resolve began to crystallize into action, the meeting room door swung open, revealing a figure from her past, the promise of unexpected support shimmering in their familiar eyes. What would they bring? Hope, chaos, or an end to her struggle? The tension wrapped around her tighter, pulsating with the weight of what lay ahead. A hush fell over the room as Sarah's heartbeat accelerated, competing with the echoes of her past. The door creaked wider, and standing in the doorway was Ellie, her former co-worker and a fierce advocate for truth in their cutthroat office. They had been close, a duo of dreamers within a sea of cynicism, but a misunderstanding had torn them apart. Ellie's presence was refreshingly defiant, stirring memories of courage Sarah thought she had lost along with their friendship. "Sarah," Ellie said, her voice steady yet warm, radiating a confidence Sarah longed to embrace. "I knew you'd have something important to say." As the room simmered with tension, Sarah clenched her jaw, wrestling with self-doubt twisted like barbed wire in her gut. How would Ellie's unexpected arrival skew the dynamics? Was it a sign of support or simply an added complication? "Thank you for joining us," Ellie, Mark, her boss, replied curtly, casting a wary glance at the red-haired dynamo who had always challenged the establishment. Sarah knew they feared her for her ability to articulate grievances that others silently accepted. It was this blatant audacity that propelled Sarah to dismiss her doubts if Ellie could be brave enough to stand freely. Could she not claim a piece of that courage for herself? As Sarah's internal conflict surged, she realized that this wasn't just about her. It was about the collaborative spirit they once shared. It would be impossible to suppress the part of her that longed for genuine support, especially when weighing the risks of confrontation. "Mark," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper, but it was met with silence. She inhaled deeply, drawing the strength from Ellie's confident stance. "I need to address my contribution to the project. I won't let it go unrecognized." The glances from her colleagues were electric. She witnessed disbelief, confusion, and a flicker of admiration from Ellie. A shift had transformed the atmosphere. They were now witnesses to a moment she had only envisioned in her most daring dreams. "Your contributions," Mark started, and she could already detect his evasion. "They were significant, and I deserve to be acknowledged," she interrupted, surging ahead. "I worked countless hours, dedicating my initiative. My ideas and hard work are what drove the project's success." With every word, a new clarity emerged, crafting a narrative empowered by resilience rather than fear. It was no longer a mere acknowledgement she sought. It was validation and a reclamation of her identity. Mark's expression turned to a scowl, and the intent to belittle her further crept in. But Sarah didn't flinch. She had crossed an invisible line she once believed was impenetrable. "You know that the system isn't built for," he attempted once more. "It isn't built for people like me," she shot back, emboldened by the energy flowing from Ellie. "So let me be the first to say it's time we change that narrative." Incredible surges of tension pulsed through the room, and she was both terrified and exhilarated. There was a sense of fight brewing inside her, and suddenly, the mere act of standing her ground didn't feel like rebellion, it felt like liberation. Ellie stepped forward, eyes glinting with enthusiasm. "Exactly. It's vital we challenge the narrative." The solidarity formed a protective barrier for Sarah, who finally felt ready to face not only Mark, but an entire lifetime of dismissals. Yet, amid this burgeoning adrenaline, doubt lingered like an unwelcome shadow. As Sarah gauged the room, she understood that this moment was only the beginning. Would her colleagues rally behind her? Would they support a shift in the status quo? Could she forge genuine connections based on mutual respect instead of trepidation? With her heart racing, she prepared for the answer but felt the weight of every risk hanging in the balance. The battle wasn't just external. It was also within her. Could she maintain the strength this newfound voice had unveiled? Or would she slip back into the shadows she had fought so hard to escape? As the echoes of confrontation swirled around her, the next step loomed precariously ahead. What developments would come from this pivotal emergence? The potential for growth or further conflict hummed in the air. She could only hope the path forward would lead her to liberation. But in those fraught moments, all Sarah could do was confront the silence that now enveloped them, each lingering second dripping with uncertainty, awaiting the decision of her colleagues. The silence hummed in the air, thick with anticipation as Sarah scanned the faces around her. Each expression felt like a window into their perceptions of her courage. Uncertainty slithered down her spine, but this time, she refused to let it take root. Her fingers gripped the edge of the conference table, a focal point as she willed herself to stand tall. Mark's silence lingered, his lips pressed into a thin line, but Sarah saw the gears turning in his mind. He was calculating whether to reassert his power or shift his strategy in light of Ellie's unexpected support. The tension radiated through her, a complex blend of anxiety and determination that urged her to keep moving forward. Look, if we're truly focused on the best outcomes for this company, she pressed on, her voice gaining strength, why not acknowledge the people who put in the work? Ignoring contributions only fosters resentment, and we'll be doing ourselves and our project an injustice. Ellie's presence was still electric, an anchor for Sarah as she leaned into this growing conviction. The other employees were now shifting their posture, exchanging glances laden with unspoken words. Sarah had noticed how power dynamics shifted in the workplace, how some individuals thrived in silence while others stifled in fear. It was time to dismantle that culture. There are countless perspectives that go unrecognized. I had to learn this the hard way. My ideas were often overshadowed, and I was left with nothing but frustration. The vulnerability cut through her words with unexpected clarity. But that's not what I want for us. No one should fight alone. We should stand together for an equitable workplace. With every sentence, Sarah felt lighter, as if she was shedding her old self, the one tied to a narrative of meekness and self-doubt. The apprehensive Sarah was being replaced by a version of herself she scarcely recognized, one fueled by the urgency for change not just for herself, but for her colleagues as well. Mark finally broke the silence, irritation etched across his features. We can't or 1T, she interjected boldly. A ripple of shock ran through the room. This is an opportunity to reshape how we work and thrive. An outdated mindset 1T help us all achieve our goals. The room shifted again, with a few colleagues reacting with reluctant nods and murmurs of agreement. Fractured loyalties were becoming clear, and Sarah recognized the subtle layers of dissent against Mark's austere approach. But a sense of terror clutched at her heart. What if this was just bravado? What if they turned against her, rallying behind Mark instead? Yet she pushed it aside, focusing on her breathing. Inhale the courage, exhale the fear. She had to remain anchored. Ellie walked closer, raising her voice. We need to build an environment where voices are heard, no matter the level. Every project thrives on the diversity of thought. Are we just going to dismiss innovation for the sake of conformity? With her heart pounding like a drum in her chest, Sarah realized they were at a crossroads. It was no longer just a question of recognition. It was about authenticity, about forging a culture where fear wouldn't dictate aspirations. She noticed some of her co-workers now leaning in, engaging with the dialogue, their interest peaking. Had she unwittingly ignited a flame? As the discussion unfolded, Sarah felt a surge of hope unfurl, within her a tantalizing prospect of genuine cooperation that could foster not only her personal growth, but reshape the very fabric of their office environment. This was the team she had longed to cultivate. Yet, just as the room started to buzz with the encouragement of potential transformation, Sarah noticed Mark's brows knit tightly together as he prepared to respond. The stakes were higher than ever. Would he double down on his indifference or embrace this pivotal moment? Her breath hitched. It was time to confront the inevitable, the moment that could shatter her newfound resolve or solidify her strength. Each second stretched as she awaited his reaction, the air brimming with uncertainty, every eye fixated on the man at the helm. The outcome remained uncertain. In that charged atmosphere, the entirety of her career, her identity, and the future of their workplace hung in the balance. Mark straightened in his chair, the tension coiling tighter in the room, and for a fleeting second, Sarah saw the flicker of doubt cross his face. But then he masked it, his expression hardening. We've built this team on a foundation of discipline and results, not on pandering to everyone's feelings. We prioritize performance, not sentiment. His dismissive tone set off a spark of defiance within Sarah. She could feel the tide turning. The murmurs of agreement had shifted into an ominous silence. This was not only a battle for her voice but a struggle for the future of the culture they had to navigate. Did they continue in secrecy, shrouded in fear of failure, or step into the light, confronting their shared aspirations? No one is suggesting we abandon our commitment to results, Sarah asserted, her voice steadying against the whirlwind of emotions. What we need is a balanced approach, strengthening our performance while creating an environment that encourages innovation. Keeping our ideas closeted does not serve any of us. least of all the mission we all share. She witnessed Les' fervent nod encouragingly from the sidelines. But this time, Sarah's gaze didn't falter. She was determined to be the catalyst for the change that was so desperately needed. The persistence of unacknowledged voices weighed heavily in the air, like clouds pregnant with rain, waiting for the storm of resolution to burst forth. Let us be real, Sarah continued, her heartbeat resonating through her very being. When was the last time you felt excited about sharing an idea in this room? The fact is, we cannot thrive unless we allow every unique voice to drive our creativity. Hiding behind a single approach stifles our growth. Mark's brow creased deeper, irritation brewing just under the surface. His power was being challenged. Perhaps that was all he knew: dominance over collaboration, authority over openness, but that could no longer determine the fate of their project. A voice from the back broke the mounting tension. "Yes, right. We can get more done together than under the current atmosphere," it chimed in. Sarah's heart soared slightly, recognition beginning to glimmer in the faces of her colleagues. Each hesitant nod was like a grain of confidence, reaffirming her position. Still, apprehension clawed at the edges of her resolve. Had she only stirred the pot simply to fuel further conflict? What if they turned that this could go awry just as quickly as it had rallied support? Mark leaned forward, hands bracing on the table, unyielding. "Look, this isn't about feeling good. It's about results. If you want to play this game of inclusivity and harmony, be prepared to lose." The weight of his statement resonated through the silence, but Sarah felt a tremor of resilience surge within her. Results. That was the driving force, but results could only thrive in an environment rooted in respect and collaboration. "Then let us redefine what results mean," she proposed, taking a deep breath. "Success is not just numbers. It's about collective achievement. I've watched projects falter because voices were silenced. Let us not allow that to happen to us." For each second that ticked by, the stakes rose higher. Mark seemed taken aback, his tightly wound demeanor faltering, though the tension in the room left no space for victory yet. Would he double down on the old ways, or could he see the value in acknowledging the direction Sarah was shepherding? Her vision of a collaborative workplace, an environment where every idea was recognized and valued, danced tantalizingly close, yet remained just out of reach. And within that moment, amidst simmering uncertainties and glimmering possibilities, another voice, someone she barely recognized, whispered within her. What if standing up for this change meant negatively impacting her relationships with those whose priorities were different? As Sarah awaited Mark's retort, the moment crystallized into clarity. The next step would determine not just her own trajectory but the very essence of the organizational culture they all inhabited. She realized she was perched on a brink. One misstep could plunge her into uncharted depths. The silence became palpable again, thick like fog. Each breath became a countdown. Might this moment finally break her free from the chains of doubt, or would it bind her further into the existing regime? As uncertainty reigned, a thought whispered urgently. Perhaps it was time to lead an authentic revolution, regardless of the cost. With her heart pounding in resonance to her ambitions, she prepared for whatever Mark would say next, knowing one truth. The era of silence was drawing to a close. The moment stretched, an invisible thread tightening between Sarah and Mark as time itself seemed to hang in the air. Was this the moment that would mark the beginning of her transformation or the end of her resolve? "Your idealism is charming, Sarah," Mark replied, his tone drenching her vision in cold showers of skepticism. "But you need to understand that this isn't a therapy session. We are here to achieve tangible outcomes, and I won't risk our future on emotional experiments." Frustration threatened to buckle her knees, yet every fiber of her being screamed for composure. Justifying her proposition required more than mere passion. She needed to coax him from his fortress of practicality and present a case fortified by strategies, data, and examples of success born from diverse contributions. The simmering defiance within her flared, emerging into a focused plan. "Then let us examine the facts." Her voice cut through the chill, sharpening with purpose. "Research shows teams that foster engagement see a 25% increase in productivity. Organizations that embrace collaboration not only innovate faster but adapt quickly to market shifts. She felt the room shift slightly, as if the collective consciousness was tilting toward her argument. Mark remained impassive, his eyebrows raised, but curiosity flickered briefly behind his measured gaze. Sarah sensed an opening, like a crack in the armor. "Consider this," she pressed on, allowing herself a glimpse of hope. "Didn't our most successful projects thrive because they were bolstered by ideas from every corner of the team? Some of the best strategies we developed came from voices that wouldn't have been heard otherwise. Imagine what we can achieve if we create a culture where everyone feels empowered to contribute." She noticed a few heads nodding cautiously in agreement, and her heart beat faster. Sections of the team that had felt isolated were stirring, their aspirations awakening alongside her. Therein lay her strength. By standing firm, she had ignited flickers of belief in her teammates that had long been suppressed. "But it's easy to romanticize inclusivity," Mark replied, a hint of irritation brewing in his tone. "What you're advocating requires time we don't have. It distracts from the goals we set. That's the misconception." She spoke with precision, every word calculated, each syllable a stepping stone toward her vision. True engagement might slow pace in the short term, but in the long run, it cultivates innovation and loyalty. If you don't invest in people, how do you expect them to invest in the mission? The current environment fosters anxiety, not creativity. The weight of his skepticism hung heavily between them, yet the intensity of her conviction gave rise to a crescendo of possibility. Mark's expression began to misalign with his argument, betraying an internal conflict he had long masked. Was it fear of change that drove him? She needed to place the spotlight squarely on this realization, to shift the narrative from conflict to collaboration. "Mark," she ventured softly, gauging the impact of her honesty, "this isn't just about processes. This stands to reshape our identity as a team. Isn't it worth considering that your decisions might not just impact numbers but also the morale that fuels those very numbers?" He shifted in his seat, the line between authority and vulnerability blurring. Sarah felt a rush of recognition within her. She was no longer an employee seeking validation. She had transformed into a leader bestowed with a vision strong enough to confront authority. This transition was not merely professional, it was deeply personal. Then it struck her, unwavering and profound. She could either retreat into the safety of compliance or forge ahead, risking everything in pursuit of something greater. The cavernous depth of her aspirations surged, embracing both the uncertainty and the thrill of potential. Although Mark visibly struggled, his eyes betraying elements of intrigue and uncertainty, she knew this was only the prelude to a more intense exchange. As the tension clawed its way back into the air, Sarah mentally prepared for the next volley. She recognized that the battle was not just for recognition in the room. It was a broader fight for her own identity as a leader who could shift paradigms. And as Mark began to respond, she braced herself for the hardest moment yet. A new challenge was looming on her horizon, one that would demand not only her strategic skills but also a reckoning with her true self. Could she balance the convictions that now defined her with the potential fallout from challenging a long-standing power? Thus, she stood on the precipice of revelation, ready to face whatever would come next, knowing full well that the real test of her resolve was just beginning. As Mark took a breath, the air crackled, thick with uncertainty and anticipation. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, Sarah. But enthusiasm doesn't translate to results. You need to show me how we can implement these ideas without derailing our deadlines. We're at a critical juncture, and I'm not willing to gamble on theories." His challenge echoed in her mind, igniting the embers of determination within her. She grasped the edge of her desk, feeling the cool metal under her fingers, grounding herself amid the surging tide of anxiety. What did it truly take to turn dreams into achievable goals? This was not just a debate. It was a revelation, one that would shape the course of her career. "Mark, let us break it down," she proposed, steeling her voice. "I can create a roadmap that aligns with our current deadlines while still fostering a more open environment. If we can start implementing small, incremental changes, we can gauge their impact without straying from our objectives. We can prove their value through measurable results. She leaned slightly forward, channeling her tenacity. A flicker of interest crossed Mark's face, and she seized the moment. For instance, what if we scheduled brief, weekly team check-ins? This way, everyone can voice their inputs, ideas, concerns, feedback, and we'll track the outcomes against our productivity metrics. Every analytical aspect bore her conviction. It wasn't just about theory. It was about firm metrics that would give her argument weight. The degree of her newfound skill began revealing itself like unexpected sunlight breaking through dark clouds. Sarah, Mark's voice cut through her thoughts again, though his tone held a degree of cautious contemplation. You're suggesting we pivot our current workflow. That's a bigger risk than you might be portraying. You're confident this will yield measurable results in such a short time frame? That question was a knife's edge, sharp with potential fallout. The fear of failure loomed heavily in the corners of her mind, but she tightrope walked between anxiety and hope. I believe it will, she asserted, confidence unyielding. Yet she felt a gust of doubt whispering at the edges of her thoughts. What if this didn't work? What if her ideas floundered? Yet beneath the tremors of uncertainty lay a fundamental truth. She was transforming. Her earlier self would have hesitated, it would have shied away from confrontation and the fear of diminishing Mark's authority. But here she was, ready to challenge the norm, ready to step into her own light, one imperfect, yet undeniably authentic. The room's atmosphere shifted palpably, others leaning in, some whispering amongst themselves. She had nudged the door open, and they were curious, their intrigue now palpable. Fine, Mark relented, his brow knitting in concentration. You have 1 month. Let's see how your incremental changes play out. But understand, his gaze hardened. If it doesn't show improvement, we revert to the previous plan. A rush of exhilaration filled her. She had been given a chance. It was a foothold on solid ground. Her moment to prove herself not just as an advocate for change but as a catalyst for transformation. She swallowed back the weight of the expectation hanging over her. This was a challenge she had already begun to embrace. Yet as the elation coursed through her, a question lingered at the forefront of her thoughts. How could she harness the momentum of this newfound responsibility to not only elevate the team, but also to fortify her burgeoning identity as a leader? As her mind raced through strategies and potential hurdles, she realized the path ahead was fraught with more than just professional implications. It demanded introspection, the need to reconcile her vision with the reality of pressure and expectation. Would she be able to manage the diverse personalities in her team while still pursuing her ambition? Casting a glance around the room, she recognized the significance of her challenge. This moment was not merely about influencing her peers, it was about unearthing her ability to lead. Amidst resistance, in the depths of this upcoming trial, the truth of who she was, her character, her values would be put to the ultimate test. With an ember of anticipation still glowing within her, she took a step back, acknowledging where she now stood. Mark had given her a chance. But how she would rise and if she would thrive was now a question only she could answer. And as the meeting drew to a close, a familiar whisper echoed in her mind, one she needed to confront. Could she rise above her self-doubt and fully embrace the leader she was becoming? Or would the weight of expectation prove too heavy to bear? As soon as the meeting adjourned, Sarah's head swam with thoughts and concerns. Her colleagues filed out, laughter and chatter enveloping the room. But she remained rooted at her desk, overwhelmed by the gravity of her situation. It wasn't just about a new strategy. This represented a fork in her career, a chance to define not only her role but her identity. Determined to channel that exhilaration into something concrete, she pulled out her notebook and began sketching ideas for the weekly check-ins. The goal, she decided, would be to strike a balance between promoting open dialogue and maintaining accountability. Each meeting would start with a quick recap of previous discussions to refresh their memories, then pivot into feedback on progress, with Sarah steering the conversation towards problem-solving. Yet with each line she wrote, self-doubt lurked nearby. What if her suggestions fell flat? What if her team didn't engage? Her heart raced at the thought, but she reminded herself that the fear of failure was a crucible through which leaders were forged. Were her ideas truly innovative, or had she simply regurgitated concepts that had existed well before her? A haunting voice in the back of her mind insisted she would never emerge from Mark's shadow. The next day, she entered the office a bit earlier than usual, desperation pushing her to muster unmatched focus. As her team trickled in, an unexpected nervousness washed over her. She cleared her throat before beckoning them into the conference room for the first check-in meeting. Here was her stage, her first step into leadership, yet every face in the room was a mirror of her own fears. "Thanks for being here," she started, her voice steady yet tinged with vulnerability. "I'm excited to implement changes to our workflow, but I can't do this alone. I need your input and collaboration." The sincerity in her words surprised her, and she could see that it resonated with her team, some nodding, others leaning forward in interest. The hour passed with a mix of energy and skepticism. As ideas flowed, it became clear that while some team members welcomed the opportunity to speak, others seemed hesitant, their brows furrowing with uncertainty. Sarah wanted to probe deeper, to bring out those voices that felt stifled, but she struggled to gauge how to do this without overstepping. She realized that to build a cohesive team, vulnerability had to be mutual. She needed to model the openness she desired from them. Suddenly, one of the quieter members, Lisa, spoke up, her voice a soft admission. "I'm not sure if this will work. There is so much pressure to meet deadlines, and discussing issues seems like it'll just slow us down." A knot formed in Sarah's stomach. She had expected pushback, but this was more than hesitation, it was a reflection of their shared concerns. Here lay the first test of her leadership, addressing objections authentically and with respect. "I appreciate you sharing that, Lisa," she replied, heart racing. "My intention isn't to complicate things but to identify obstacles before they hinder our progress." The words hung in the air, susceptible to interpretation. But after a beat, something shifted. They began to discuss their struggles more openly, and the atmosphere morphed from fearful to hopeful. Sarah felt the explanation unlocking something inside her, a realization that leadership was not just about authority. It was about fostering community in pursuit of shared goals. Afterward, fueled by the raw discussions, she returned to her desk. Each conversation that had taken place was a step forward, yet her heart still thudded with anxiety. Would they be able to sustain this momentum? Could she push through the doubts that were already creeping back in? Days morphed into weeks, and the cycle continued. Each check-in revealed growth, but also highlighted moments where frustration simmered just below the surface, particularly with Mark's looming expectations. For every stride made, she was acutely aware of the balancing act she was engaged in. Each meeting felt like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and she knew a breaking point loomed. And there it was, the phone call from Mark that would determine the course of her journey. The moment of truth was approaching, and with it, the weight of accountability bore down. Would she be able to demonstrate the changes she had promised? Would Mark see her as a leader or merely a glimmer of potential? As the phone rang, she took a deep breath, braces herself for the confrontation that could tip the scales in either direction, navigating the precipice of her internal struggle. Would she grasp the reins of her career, or would she let this opportunity slip away? Her heart pounded as she stared at the phone, each ring reverberating in her chest like an erratic drumbeat. Sarah could feel sweat beading on her forehead. This call wasn't just another conversation. It was the moment that would define her as a leader or cement her as a mere assistant in Mark's world. Finally, she answered. "Hi Mark. Thanks for calling." "Sarah," he replied. The tone was unreadable. Was it disappointment or excitement? "I've been hearing some positive feedback about the changes you've implemented in your team's workflow. I want to discuss that, but I also have some concerns." A knot twisted tighter in her stomach. She braced against her desk, ensuring her voice held steady. "Of course, what's on your mind? Some members of the team are still hesitant to speak up during meetings, and I need to know what your plan is to change that. You've always been resourceful. I trust you can come up with something." The pressure mounted. He was right, yet his expectation felt like an avalanche ready to bury her. "I understand. I think by modeling vulnerability and encouraging a culture of feedback, we'll open up those lines of communication. I plan to create smaller breakout sessions where quieter voices can be heard. It's a slow process, but I believe it'll yield results. There was a pause on the line, each second thickening the tension. Mark's response came slowly. That sounds promising, but you know how fast-paced our work can be. We can't afford to slow down too much. Remember, results are what matter. With those words, a chill swept through her. Results. It all boiled down to performance metrics, not the human nuances she was trying to cultivate. With the fear of her aspirations crashing down upon her, she recognized her next test. It was time to assert her commitment to a different kind of leadership. I understand, and I'm committed to meeting our deadlines. However, I also believe that a team that feels supported and is allowed to express concerns will ultimately be more productive. All right, I'll give you a couple of weeks to show me a tangible change, he said, cutting through her fervor. I don't want to see defensiveness. I want to see results, Sarah. He hung up, leaving her in silence. Sarah sat motionless, piecing together what she had just committed to. She had spent months finding her voice. Yet here was that relentless whisper reminding her she was still only an echo of Mark's expectations. A knot of resolve tightened within her. Reflecting on Mark's message sparked a realization she needed a new strategy. Something with depth that didn't compromise her vision. Her next move had to go beyond superficial gains. She needed to tap into her team's deeper potential. At her next check-in, Sarah would introduce a new element: anonymous feedback. This would ensure everyone had a voice without the fear of judgment. She began drafting a plan that intertwined their personal growth with team objectives, integrating sessions focused on enhancing both individual skills and collaborative efforts. As she worked late into the night, the hum of her surroundings faded, replaced by an electric anticipation. This was the kind of leadership she wanted to embody, the kind that didn't shy away from vulnerability but leaned into it as a strength. But just as she began to feel a sense of control, her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lisa, who had seemed so hesitant in previous meetings. Can we talk? I have some thoughts I believe could help. The uncertainty returned, gnawing at her newfound confidence. Was it a plea for help or yet another obstacle? With the stakes so high, she couldn't ignore it. She could either choose to tackle this head-on or let another opportunity slip with a heart full of doubt. The clock ticked ominously as she contemplated the weight of her next decision. Would she embrace the challenge Lisa posed, or retreat into the secure but suffocating embrace of her insecurities? Every avenue seemed laden with potential risks. A direct confrontation loomed as Sarah prepared to decide once and for all who she would become. Sarah stared at the message from Lisa, the request hanging in the air like a storm cloud. She felt a whirlwind of emotions swirl inside her, each one colliding with her ambition. Fear and doubt whispered in her ear, reminding her of moments where she had shied away from confrontation. Yet another part of her, the part she'd been working so hard to nurture, urged her to seize this moment. Embracing this conversation could be the key to understanding the depth of her team's hesitations and revealing the strengths she needed to cultivate. Taking a deep breath, she pressed her fingers against the keys, her mind racing as she composed a response. Of course, Lisa. I'm free tomorrow afternoon. I'd love to hear your thoughts. The instant she hit send, a wave of apprehension washed over her. Was she ready to confront what Lisa might say? The growing urgency within her demanded that she act, not just react. This was a chance to elevate not only Lisa's insights, but her own leadership capacity. The next day, as Sarah prepared for the meeting, she visualized how this conversation might unfold. What if Lisa conveyed concerns she hadn't anticipated? As her thoughts spiraled, she felt the familiar tightness of anxiety in her stomach. She had to pull herself together. Tension only created barriers. She needed openness. When they finally sat down together, Sarah noticed Lisa's hesitation, the way her fingers twisted nervously around her coffee cup. Thanks for meeting with me, Sarah, she began, her eyes darting to the ground. Of course, Sarah replied, softening her tone. I really want to hear what's on your mind. With each word, Sarah watched as Lisa gradually opened up, sharing her own experiences of feeling stifled in meetings. I feel like I sometimes have ideas that could really help, but I just can't find the courage to voice them," she admitted. This was the moment Sarah had anticipated and dreaded in equal measure. As she listened, Sarah recognized the echoes of her own fears mirrored in Lisa's words. "Hesitance can come from many places," she said, leaning in. "What if we develop strategies to address this together? I want our team to feel safe in expressing themselves." Encouraged by Sarah's openness, Lisa began to articulate practical suggestions. They brainstormed ways to create an environment where all voices would be seen and heard. The more Lisa spoke, the more Sarah felt emboldened. They were building a genuine path forward. In their conversation, Sarah discovered something unexpected within herself, a capacity to nurture vulnerability, her own and Lisa's. This was a pivotal moment of clarity. Once she had only sought validation. Now she was forging a space for authenticity. The very notion of nurturing an environment where both vulnerability and strength could coexist started to change her perspective. By the time the meeting concluded, Sarah felt invigorated. This was leadership, not just managing metrics or demand for results, but fostering a culture built upon understanding. She could feel the weight lift from her shoulders as she realized how powerful it felt to advocate for others and, in doing so, reclaim her own voice. As they wrapped up their discussion, Lisa looked at Sarah with newfound determination. "This feels right. I think it could really change things for us." Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. But a thought lingered in her mind while she was building bridges. Marcus' expectation loomed like a shadow. Would these changes be seen as results? The anxiety gnawed at her once again. Leaving the meeting, Sarah felt the thrill of a new path. Yet as the door closed behind her, she was left questioning whether she could sustain this momentum. The urge to prove herself was palpable, but now she knew that her worth lay not merely in results, but in cultivating a genuine team spirit. And as she prepared for the critical weeks ahead, Sarah braced herself. The real challenge was coming not just for her vision but also against the rigid standards imposed by Mark. Would she be able to strike a balance between her values and the harsh realities of performance metrics? The moment of truth was fast approaching. Would her vision for a supportive team thrive, or would the metrics pull her back into the shadows? As the weeks raced by, Sarah steered her team through the transformative project she envisioned. Together, they held weekly check-ins filled with budding ideas and renewed vigor. She had opened the dialogue, but now it was time to solidify the action and prove to Mark that this approach yielded results. The tension in the air was electric as the deadline crept closer. Every day, Sarah watched her colleagues bloom, their ideas blossoming into tangible contributions. Yet, in the back of her mind, a persistent worry loomed. Marcus' rigid expectations hovered like a dark cloud. Each moment only amplified her desire to demonstrate that collaboration could drive their performance higher than ever before. On the day of the presentation to Mark, the boardroom was charged with an unusual energy. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped to the front. She had spent hours compiling metrics from their check-ins, showcasing how their morale was translating into results. Every teammate who had once hesitated to speak up was now eagerly contributing. Together, they had constructed a compelling case that proclaimed the validity of her approach. As she began her presentation, her confidence surged. "Mark, I asked for time to present how our new workflow has positively impacted our productivity," she stated, a smile playing on her lips. "By implementing regular feedback sessions, we're witnessing a 30% increase in engagement rates and a faster turnaround on project timelines." Mark's brow furrowed, and she could feel the tension tighten around them. "And these metrics are derived from collective input?" he asked, skepticism lacing his tone. "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "Each member is not just a cog in a wheel. Their input matters. They feel seen, and that's empowering. But here's the critical part. Our outputs reflect that engagement. We can achieve more together than we ever could by only focusing on numbers." The fingers tapping on the table, the slight nods from her colleagues, she could see their support. Sarah found herself breaking through the walls of uncertainty. She wasn't merely advocating for her team anymore. She was shaping their identities and aspirations. Mark took a moment, glancing at the data presented before him. He leaned back in his chair. This is promising, but what's the plan moving forward? We need consistency. Moving forward, we'll continue to monitor these metrics while fostering an open environment for creativity and solutions. I'll keep implementing strategies that encourage collaboration, including mentorship pairings and cross-functional workshops, she asserted confidently. This is just the beginning, and I'm committed to keeping the momentum alive. A moment of silence followed. Sarah held her breath, every second stretching into eternity. Finally, Mark spoke up, caution softening the harshness of his initial response. All right, let us proceed with this approach for another quarter. But the results will need to be clear. The weight lifting from her chest was palpable. Sarah exhaled deeply, relief washing over her as applause erupted from her colleagues. Empowerment filled the room. She had not only gained approval but respect. Weeks turned into a month, and as they began to reflect on their progress, the team's synergy had reached heights Sarah hadn't dreamed possible. Each week, her colleagues rallied together, holding one another accountable and celebrating each success, no matter how small. Recognition flowed from Mark, not just begrudging acknowledgement of Sarah's efforts but genuine respect for her leadership. Feedback turned into praise, and Sarah felt her confidence solidify into a new identity. No longer the silent supporter, she was now leading change, embodying the very strength her grandmother had inscribed in those journals. Months later, at the quarterly review, Sarah watched as Mark presented their team's newfound approaches to the board. Thanks to Sarah's leadership, we've not only increased productivity but rebuilt our culture. Team input is driving performance and we're witnessing astounding improvement. I want to recognize her role in this transformation. The weight of validation enveloped her as her colleagues erupted into applause once more. Sarah stood, beaming, feeling the burden of self-doubt shatter around her. She had accomplished what once felt like an impossible dream. She had proven her value, not just to herself, but to everyone around her. This was the moment Sarah had fought for, a culmination of courage, ambition, and the belief that unraveling potential within others was as vital as her own growth. This declaration of success, and more importantly, the fulfillment that gleamed in her heart, confirmed that she was on her path. Empowered advisor, trusted leader, and a voice amidst the noise. As she departed from that meeting, she recognized that each challenge had been the catalyst for her metamorphosis. The fears that once shackled her had become stepping stones. Ambitions were no longer suppressed but celebrated. Sarah smiled as she embraced the future, not with uncertainty, but with solid confidence and unwavering purpose. Now is the time for you to take action. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for these transformative journeys. Comment your reactions and theories about Sarah's extraordinary journey. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second for them to be inspired. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand how crucial it is to support the channel through these actions.